Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. Ukraine has invaded Russia. This is happening right now. Check out some of these headlines. Ukrainian forces advance up to 10 kilometers into Russia's Kursk region, according to the Institute for the Study of War. Footage from August 6th and 7th shows Ukrainian armored vehicles along the 38K 030 route about 10 kilometers into Russian territory, in an operation that appears to be more than a mere border crossing. Thousands flee as Russia battles Ukrainian border incursion for a second day. The incursion began on Tuesday morning, with the Russian Defense Ministry announcing it had deployed air and artillery firepower to try to quash Ukrainian troops breaking into the Kursk border region. Ukrainian forces reportedly establish a foothold in border villages of Russia's Kursk Oblast. Local social media channels in Kursk are flooded with posts from residents seeking to locate and evacuate relatives from settlements that have all lost communication and electricity. Wow. So I think I found the map of how far Ukrainians have got into the Kursk Oblast. When we go on deepstate.live, this is the official map that most pro-Ukrainian accounts use. They're not updating anything for operational security, but we do have maps released by the Russians. According to Russia already knows this, so I can share this. This is how far the Ukrainian forces have got. They've seized 350 square kilometers of territory within the first 48 hours. This is more territory that Ukraine has taken from Russia than Russia has taken from Ukraine in the Kharkiv Oblast in the last 4 months. And Russia did have defense lines prepared on their side of the border. This was defense line number 1, and then there was a second one behind it. And Ukraine smashed through it within the first day. And there's nothing behind this second defense line. Ukraine is in open skies and open territory. There's no trenches, there's no mines. Ukraine can go as deep as they want, and Russia has to figure out how to stop them. We do have a report on the ground. This is a Russian resident in the, I believe, the city of Zuja. I think I'm saying that correctly. And this is what this Russian has to say. Zuja, the situation. I was just in the center. In short, everything is more or less intact. The prosecutor's office is wrecked. There's a Ukrainian flag hanging on the city administration building. So the Ukrainians took the center of this city. There are many soldiers and equipment. He's talking about Ukrainian soldiers. I thought about taking a photo, but then a soldier called me over. He checked my documents. He wasn't rude or anything, just said that filming wasn't allowed. I asked him what we should do now, what will happen. He basically said to learn Ukrainian and prepare for a referendum. I'm in effing shock. Honestly, I don't care anymore what flag we're under, as long as it's peaceful. If our own can't protect us, maybe at least Ukrainians can. Bye. So the joke online is that Ukraine is there to liberate the people of Kursk, and they're going to hold a referendum so the people of Kursk can finally get their independence from that oppressive government in Moscow. This is a joke. I don't think Ukraine is actually going to do this, but this is an interesting interaction in that Ukrainian soldiers are talking to the locals, and they're not interested in torturing or brutalizing or killing them. They're just going after valid military targets on the Russian side of the border. So what is Ukraine's objective with this cross-border raid? And I think we can identify several. But I think one of the immediate benefits is this rail line. Here's Zaduja, and this rail line supplies the Russian military in Belgorod. If Ukraine can seize this rail line, then getting military equipment to Belgorod is going to be more challenging. They're going to have to take an alternate route. Additionally, Ukraine can just permanently rip up these tracks and destroy the station and prevent it from being easily rebuilt if Ukraine retreats back to their side of the border. What's different about this time than last time? A year ago, it was the Russian Volunteer Corps and the Freedom of Russia Legion doing cross-border raids. This is the proper Ukrainian military. I think Russian volunteers are involved, but this is a main offensive into Russian territory from uniformed Ukrainian personnel. Another secondary targets, Russia's Gazprom says gas to Europe continues to flow through the Kursk region despite the fighting. Russia's state-owned gas corporation said the transit volume of the only remaining route for Russian gas supplies to Europe through Ukraine decreased but hasn't stopped. So this is the Zuja gas metering station, and nearly 50% of all Russian gas exports to the European Union flow through this station. Ukraine just captured it. Here's what the gas terminal looks like, and this is basically the entry point for the pipelines going through Ukraine that feed natural gas to the European Union. So Ukraine now controls this. And the question is, how does Russia get it back? If this is not a temporary cross-border raid and Ukraine starts digging in around this gas terminal, does Russia attack it? Does Russia bomb it and risk cutting off their gas exports to the European Union? Mostly Hungary and Slovakia. So this is interesting because even if Ukrainian forces have to retreat, they could destroy this gas terminal and then just say the Russians bombed it. Or the Russians will just bomb it. They're that careless and stupid, and I think something bad is going to happen to this gas terminal. Another thing that Ukraine might be moving towards, belatedly, Russia moves to protect the Kursk nuclear power plant. As Ukrainian forces move closer to the Kursk nuclear power plant, Moscow is finally taking steps to protect it. So Russia took one of Ukraine's power plants, and Ukraine is now threatening to capture one of their nuclear power plants. I don't actually think Ukraine is going to do this. I don't think many in the international community would be excited about this idea of there being combat operations and fighting near a nuclear power plant. But it is a possibility if they can take it without fighting, and then they could offer it as a trade for the Russians if they can get the Zaporizhia nuclear power plants. Russia's taking horrendous losses. Russian helicopter tanks reportedly destroyed in fighting across the border in Kursk. There are pictures and videos appearing online of heavy Russian losses. They were caught off guard. Russia did not see this coming. Russia did not have the intelligence. Kudos to the Ukrainian military for keeping this a secret. I didn't even think this was a possibility. And the clearest indication that Russia didn't see this coming is they didn't have this part of the border staffed with contract soldiers. Conscripts were guarding this part of the border. So to the YouTube censors, these are not corpses, these are not bodies, these are Russian conscripts surrendering, laying down their arms and allowing themselves to be taken prisoner by the Ukrainian forces. They were forced to walk and march back to the Ukrainian border where they'll be processed. And this is a huge victory for Ukraine because conscripts are more valuable than contract soldiers. When an impoverished Russian man from Siberia tries to get that $2,000 a month, he volunteered. He signed a contract. So there's very little sympathy for him amongst the general Russian population if something bad happens to him. But conscripts, Putin has tried very hard the last 2 years not to use them in Ukraine. He doesn't want Russian mothers and Russian family members from Moscow and St. Petersburg concerned about their sons and nephews going to a war zone when they didn't volunteer. So the large number of POWs is a big humanitarian win for Ukraine. This is a good chance to exchange Ukrainian prisoners and a huge win for the families of Ukrainian soldiers who have been waiting for their loved ones to return for over a year. Putin's going to want these conscripts back, and he's going to trade valuable Ukrainian POWs to get back these conscripts. This is a disaster. Putin blasts indiscriminate Ukrainian incursion into the border region. Boo-hoo, Putin. You started this war 2.5 years ago. You now have to deal with the consequences. So I am going to read Putin's statement to the nation. This is how he explained 2.5 years into his special limited military operation that Russia has just been invaded. We'll have to start with the events in Kursk Oblast. The Kyiv regime carried out another massive provocation with indiscriminate shelling from various weapons, including missiles, of civilian buildings, residential houses, ambulances. Immediately after this meeting, I will meet with the heads of the law enforcement agencies, MOD, General Staff, Border Enforcement Unit of the FSB, and we'll listen to a report about the events in the Kursk Oblast. But I wanted to note that as a result of my discussion with Vice Governor of the Kursk Oblast, we gave instructions to civil departments in terms of assisting residents of the region. And I'm asking the government to start dealing with this issue immediately. To coordinate this job, I'm asking the First Deputy Government Chair, Dennis. So Putin is offering 10,000 rubles to any Russian citizen who's been displaced because of the fighting in Kursk. We will assume that the decision on a one-time payment of 10,000 rubles to citizens who need it has been made. The necessary resources will be allocated. So I'm sorry that the unnecessary war I started, is now forcing you to flee your homes, the people of Kursk. I'll give you $100. 10,000 rubles is about $100 US for you to relocate and start a new life. This man's a piece of work. Putin meets with top Russian officials over Kursk region situation as more battles are being reported. You have to just see Putin's face as he meets with the new defense minister, Belousov. Shoigu is there, and then Gerasimov is reporting to him over the video chat. Just look at Putin's face during this meeting.
Продвижение противника вглубь территории на Курском направлении остановлено. В настоящее время подразделения группировки «Север» совместно с пограничными органами ФСБ России продолжают уничтожать противника в районах, непосредственно примыкающих к российско-украинской границе. Потери противника составили 315 человек, в том числе не менее 100 убитыми и 215 человек ранеными. Уничтожено 54 единицы бронированной техники, в том числе 7 танков. Операция будет завершена разгромом противника и выходом на государственную границу. Доклад закончен.
That face from Putin as Gerasimov is telling them, we've destroyed 50 tanks and 100 armored vehicles and thousands of soldiers. So the parody account Darth Putin on Twitter has been having the time of his life the last 2 days. I want to share with you some of these parody tweets from Darth Putin. When I said I wanted a buffer zone around Kursk, I didn't mean for Ukraine to create one. At this rate, I'll be asking to join NATO for protection against Ukraine. Biden asked me if I would prefer a ride or ammunition. I call on the West to close the skies over Kursk. Ukraine is advancing so fast in Kursk because they aren't stopping to steal toilets. The good news, this isn't as big of a disaster as the Wagner mutiny a year ago. My trolls seem to think that just happened to someone else in a different dimension. So this is fascinating. The comparison between Prigozhin's thunder run to Moscow, his mutiny, and then what Ukraine is doing. We'll talk about some of this analysis. Why did our state allow this? Russians in border regions slam officials in action as Ukrainian forces attack. So here's a Russian man fleeing his home in Zaduja, and this is what he has to say about the Russian armed forces. Ukraine invaded Russia through our city. At 3:11, the shelling started. We jumped into our car, had to move away, then returned for documents under shelling. Our house was shelled. It's dangerous to return. Tanks are there. They entered from this city. The government says everything is all right. Nothing's happening. It's total effery. Going back is scary. It's utter bollocks. Where's our glorious army? No air defense. In Kursk, at least, there are helicopters. We have F all. The Akhmat Chechen forces must have left first. There is a report that there were some Chechens in the area, but as soon as fighting started, they fled because Chechens don't actually do any real fighting. People wait on the highway from Soldalsky district to Kursk Ring Road. Those without vehicles can't return yet. Parents were left to die. They couldn't go. It's entirely possible that Ukraine might start evacuating Russian civilians back to Ukraine for their own safety. Russia dispatches reinforcements to tackle the Ukrainian cross-border attacks in the Kursk region. So Russia will have a response, but this is fascinating because Ukraine just did to Russia what Russia did to Ukraine 4 months ago with the reinvasion of Kharkiv. And for people who support Russia, they're justifying their anemic performance, advancing only 5 kilometers, by saying this is still valuable. This is diverting military attention and resources from the Donbas region, so Ukraine has to protect the city of Kharkiv. Well, Ukraine just did the exact same thing to Russia. By punching through 10 kilometers deep in the Kursk region, Russia now has to reallocate forces. They have to divert attention and resources from the Donbas region, from Kharkiv even, to reinforce and expel these Ukrainians from Sumy. And what Russia did to Ukraine is they forced them to basically worry about their entire border region. They had to dig trenches and supply troops and reinforcements, but now Russia has to do the exact same thing. They can't cheat and just post some conscript soldiers with only 2 months' experience in the military on the border region. If Russia wants to continue this war, they have to fortify and post contract soldiers at the entirety of the border. Otherwise, this could happen again in the Bryansk Oblast or a different part of the Belgorod Oblast. Ukraine found a weak point. This was actually quite brilliant. U.S. says Ukraine didn't notify them about the alleged Kursk incursion. This is a good thing. I don't think Ukraine should be telling the United States exactly what they're planning. There are spies and leaks everywhere. There's spies in the Ukrainian forces. There's spies here in the United States. But I do want to dispel some disinformation. People on social media have been posting that the United States isn't happy about this, or the United States is panicking about this. And this originated from a Russian news agency. There's no statement or press release from any U.S. official showing their panic or disapproval of what Ukraine is doing. The only official statement from the United States government is this one. Ultimately, the decision about how Ukraine conducts its military operations are decisions that Ukraine makes. So the United States is not showing support or encouragement, but they're also not panicking or showing condemnation. I think the United States wants to play both sides. They want to placate Russia and say, we didn't know about this, we had nothing to do with this. Don't blame us for Ukraine invading your territory. You're the ones who started this unnecessary war 2.5 years ago. And here's an interesting analysis from Timothy Milovanov. He's the president of the Kyiv School of Economics. Ukraine's offensive in Kursk demonstrates that Russia's nuclear threat is a bluff and renders the entire US Biden administration's doctrine of de-escalation irrelevant. First, Ukraine has clearly escalated the conflict, but it essentially mirrored Russia's recent actions in Kharkiv by invading neighboring villages across the border. Thus, it shows that Russia always escalates and the West does nothing. But it also shows when Ukraine escalates, Russia does nothing, at least for now, but we will soon know. More importantly, unless Putin retaliates with nuclear weapons, his threats of nuclear retaliation are as good as dead. Remember, Putin used to threaten nuclear response if Ukraine liberated the city of Kherson. Now Ukraine has invaded Kursk. And what happens? Nothing, no nukes. I have a friend who serves in the Ukrainian army. He sees several new critical points. He says the open use of registered units of the armed forces of Ukraine in attacks on Russian territory is unprecedented. As with some previous raids into Moscow's territory and Prigozhin's march on Moscow, there is no coordinated response from Russia. There's no clear chain of command, no evacuation of civilians, no functioning civil defense inside of Russia. Russia is a failed state. When something new happens, when they get attacked where they don't expect, the Russian state becomes paralyzed. Everyone lacks initiative and waits for orders, but orders aren't coming from anywhere. When Russia eventually falls, it will happen exactly this way. This really concerned Putin a year ago with Prigozhin's rebellion because nobody did anything. Generals weren't rushing to join Prigozhin's efforts, but nobody was speaking out against Prigozhin. When in a dictatorship, there's a challenge to the dictator, a lot of people just freeze, and they want to see who's going to win. They want to pick the winning side. This offensive into Kursk from the Ukrainians makes Putin look incredibly weak. And all of a sudden, the people loyal to Putin aren't sure what to do, because maybe Putin might not be around much longer. Russia's not going to win this war. This is bad news for Russia. Ukraine launched more drones than Russia in the month of July, according to President Zelensky. In terms of this, Ukraine's defense and security forces are already gaining an advantage. And in July, our soldiers used more drones than the occupier. This should be a steady trend on the front line for all types of drones that our units have. So Russia still has the artillery advantage and the advantage in glide bombs, but Ukraine has gone all in on drones, and they now have a serious drone advantage on the front lines. Footage shows Ukrainian FPV drone destroying a Russian Mi-28 attack helicopter in midair. In what may be a historic first, a Ukrainian FPV drone appears to have hit a Russian attack helicopter during active combat operations, and this was over the territory of Russia. There is a video, if you want to see it for yourself, I'll link it down below, but this is an FPV drone that managed to sneak up on a Russian helicopter, and the helicopter's gone. Ukraine destroys a Russian Su-34 bomber in a deep strike. This happened 4 or 5 days ago. We had the satellite images, but we didn't know how bad it was. And it's pretty bad. This is the Russian airbase where the ammunition depot was hit by Ukrainian drones. Everything went boom, and there were some planes. There was speculation there might have been some damage, and that is not light damage. That is... They can't even use this plane for scrapper parts. This is how big of an explosion the ammunition depot did when it was hit. Deadly blast at a sanctioned Russian arms factory kills 3 people. Ukraine had nothing to do with this. This was just some kind of safety violation, I'm sure, that led to an explosion at this factory. Russian Telegram channels report an explosion and fire at the Transneft oil refinery in the Komi Republic. Once again, no reports of drones, so this was just an on-site accident, and things in Russia go boom and catch fire on their own all the time. Russia's fourth dam bursts in 2 weeks. I don't understand how Russia's infrastructure could be so bad, but the number of these smaller dams that have broken since the snow melted in the spring, this feels like I mean, this is 4 dams in 2 weeks, but they're losing on average 1 dam like a week. And every time this happens, all the villagers, their homes are flooded, their crops are ruined. I mean, it's just a complete disaster, and then nobody has clean drinking water anymore. This is kind of a big story. Russian railway networks facing imminent collapse, according to a report. So this is leaked audio of the Russian Railways Deputy Managing Director, Sergei Kobzev, in a meeting with his subordinates in which he threatens them with execution by firing squad if they fail to maintain Russia's rail networks. Here's what he says. "We are together making plans. We are 4 days away from a complete shutdown of the rail network, with all the tragedies, firing squads and associated matters, and so on. We find ourselves in this condition. Therefore, I ask everyone to get this out of your heads. This here is our segment of the rail. Job well done to ourselves, and the rest are idiots. I stress, there is no longer such a thing as, this is my rail segment, there is nothing." So this managing director is being critical of his employees for only taking care of their segment of the rail network. He's trying to explain to all of them, they're responsible for everything. If the rail network is sabotaged or breaks down in one point, everyone needs to treat this like a 5-alarm fire and respond to it. I don't think the Russians working on these rail lines care. They're probably happy not to be mobilized or conscripted and sent to Ukraine, but yeah, I mean, this guy's threatening them with death if they don't maintain Putin's rail networks. Real quick about US politics, Harris VP pick Governor Tim Walz is good news for Ukraine. I didn't see this coming because Minnesota's not a swing state, but the more I listen to and learn about Tim Walz, the more I like him. He's a strong pick in support of Ukraine. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can just listen to the Russians. Russian state TV bashes Tim Walz. So I'll link this clip down below. I'm not going to read it. I know people are kind of exhausted with US politics, but the Russians hate Tim Walz. As soon as they learned he's a strong supporter of Ukraine, that's all they needed to hear. They're now trashing this guy on Kremlin state TV. Meanwhile, they love J.D. Vance. The Russians hate Tim Walz, and they love J.D. Vance. That's really all you need to know as an American voter. And there is this report I want to quick share. Vance says he won't even take calls from Ukraine in leaked texts. So these texts were given to the Washington Post from a friend of J.D. Vance, in which during the aid bill talks last year and earlier this year, J.D. Vance was bragging to his friends how he would refuse meetings and not even accept phone calls from anyone in the Ukrainian government. That's how much J.D. Vance hates Ukraine and directly or indirectly supports Russia. One piece of good news for Ukraine for you today, aside from everything else. EU approves 4.2 billion payments to Ukraine under recovery facility. The funds support macro financial stability and public administration reforms as part of Ukraine's EU ascension. So this is the 50 billion that the EU is going to spend to help Ukraine update everything so that they can someday join the European Union. Final video I want to share with you is once again from U.S. journalist in Ukraine, Zarina Zabrisky. She's in the city of Kherson, and I just want to share this report. so the world doesn't forget about the people of Kherson.
This is in my neighborhood. The dog was injured and now at veterinarian. And several buildings are destroyed and damaged. This is the grad that hit this building. There's zero military objects here. These are private houses on my street. So this is a part of the Russian grad, and this is the warhead. This is what hit the wall, made this hole, made all this damage, and landed right here. The church I just went to was built in 1898. This is yet another grad. It is a beautiful building from 1901 with now broken windows. The residents already cleaning and fixing. And at the same time, people are selling watermelons. The shelling continues, but life continues as well.
The shelling continues, but life continues as well. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.